Okay, so hello, I am here with Mr. Benjamin Honeycutt, who has just published a book called Bleak, which I want to find out all about it, all about the publishing process, every single thing that you have been doing. So, first of all, Ben, tell me a little bit about yourself, because nobody knows who you are, who's watching my channel. Not that many people watch your channel, but tell me about yourself. Who are you?
My name is Ben Honeycutt. I grew up in central Kansas, and I am entering my fifth year as a teacher. I guess it's November already. I've been teaching for 5 years now. And I ended up publishing a book, a young adult book that was kind of inspired from my experiences with bullying. And these experiences have shaped me in so many ways. They were also I think the biggest influence as to why I wanted to enter the classroom, why I wanted to become a teacher. And since then have honestly shaped kind of my life's trajectory. I also have had just a wonderful opportunity in my life to help establish an educational nonprofit. And we've done work in Nepal and in Kenya, and helping funding the construction of classrooms in under-resourced communities in both Nepal and Kenya. And I think, honestly, my experiences, my encounters with bullying in elementary school have honestly shaped that trajectory in my life.
Well, that's amazing. You've got a lot going on, so it's not just you're not just Ben the writer. You're Ben who has so many different things going on. But I think the first thing. So, if it's okay, tell me about the experiences that formed the foundation for this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it honestly, I think it kind of started my fourth grade year. I had my first sort of ethical dilemma, I think, that I had ever encountered. And I had two friends that had gotten into a huge argument with each other. And I was kind of friends with everybody at my school at that time. Like, my dad was an art teacher there. My mom was student teaching at my elementary school. And my dad was a legendary art teacher, which I'm sure comes as no surprise to you. When we would come into his art class, there would just be like this giant cardboard submarine in the room. And he would say, students, today we are going to go on a deep sea underwater adventure. And we're going to need a captain. We are going to need to find a resource that can save humanity. And that we were second graders, and we would have to, like, as we are in this like cardboard submarine, we would have to try to navigate and try, and also like he would have us create documentary experiences. It was pretty amazing. And so, kind of on my dad's reputation, I was pretty well liked for that reason. But when this happened, one of my close friends, his name was Connor, he started getting picked on, and we didn't know that he was kind of having some difficult issues at home. And I remember I got invited to kind of join in and pick on Connor with the other students. And I remembered, like, that summer, Connor and I went to a pool nearby, and all of my money had fallen out of my pocket, which when you're a third grader, that's like the biggest tragedy. It's almost like a Greek tragedy when you have money to get a soda and all of it falls out, and he actually had shared his soda with me. Like, he had like spent the money he had to share a Dr. Pepper with me. And I remembered that. And I remembered, like, and I still to this day, like, what third grader, what 9-year-old like offers to like share a soda with someone else. And so I just couldn't do it. Like, I couldn't join in and pick on him. And so that day I stood up for him, and it honestly completely changed my reputation. It completely changed everything in the school when that happened. It became Connor and I versus the world. We first got like ostracized from the recess football games from the other fourth graders. And so what we ended up doing is we ended up sneaking out early and just punting the class football over the fence, so no one got to play football. And it was like this adventure. It was like the first time I was trying to figure out like who I was, and it was like the first time I felt really in touch with the person I wanted to be. But the next year, Connor transferred to a new school. My dad left and my mom left, and suddenly it's just me. And I had those actions had burned a lot of bridges the year before, and that year, I had those experiences are experiences that have come to shape my life. The one experience I remember the most is we were playing this recess soccer game, and I was the goalie, and one student had yelled out to everyone, like, anyone who doesn't want to be a part of Ben's team, he used a slur, not Ben, can come and join my team. And everyone left. It was just me. That was it. And another thing too, like, my parents were both switching careers at this time, and it was, I think, the hardest time we had financially as a family. And so I would have these experiences at school, come home. One time I came home and our door was locked, like the bank had repossessed our house. And so my mom, being the super heroic person that she was able to work something out with the bank. But there was like a moment where we weren't sure what our living situation was going to be. We didn't know if we were going to be able to keep our house. And I'll always remember the next day at school, like after I'm going through all this bullying, and I'm not telling my parents about any of this, like I'm keeping this from them, I'm not really sharing it with anyone. When I came to school, my fifth grade teacher was standing at my desk, and he had me clean out my desk because of how messy it was. He had me clean it out in front of the entire class, like one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. And this is a teacher, like he had taught for over 20 years. He could have asked what was going on in my life. He could have tried to talk to me to see if something was wrong at home. He could have called my parents. He could have done all these things, but instead he humiliated me. And that was almost, I remember that moment, it was almost like he was giving permission to the wolves, right? Like he's giving permission to these other students in the room. I would say the bullying at that point just went up by like tenfold from that point, because it was almost like this implicit permission. And that really inspired the core of this book. It's, I think with a lot of, I grew really frustrated in high school. My parents ended up, when I finally broke down to my parents, they got me out of this. They got me out of that school, and I spent years just kind of reflecting on this issue and trying to, I think, find closure in my own life about some of these things, because it was intense. It was every single day, and to the point where I started sitting at the girls' table, because the boys' table, it was just constant, like constantly just a barrage of insults and all these things. And with the girls, at least, they weren't vocal about their insults to me, so it made it easy. And I had to really find myself after these things. And the thing that I remembered the most was, or the thing that stuck with me as I watched, we would have these school presentations through high school where they would bring a speaker in from out of state. He was there for an hour, and he would talk about this bully almost like as this like bad archetype, where it's like this big 6'3" kid who's stealing your lunch money. And even when I was in school, we were long past lunch money. We all had cards. You couldn't steal it anymore. There was nothing to steal. And it felt so detached from reality. And I remember like everyone was just making fun of this presentation. And I think there are really good anti-bullying presenters out there. Like my own dad, speaks out about, anti-bullying. But that was unfortunately not where the conversation was in high school. It was always this sort of detached bully in school who was often portrayed as like overweight, who was often portrayed as these things. And what I found was that it was almost the opposite that was true. Like it was never really matched the reality of this bullying issue. And the more I reflected on it, the more it felt almost like an institutional problem. I saw that all the time, where often the bullies felt like they had cover in the buildings that they were in. And so when I wrote this book, I constantly remembered being humiliated in front of my whole class. And I constantly remembered how when it felt like my peers had cover, when it felt like that my peers were, when they knew they were going to get away with it, how that just intensified that issue of bullying. And so that was, I think, really what my goal was when writing this book, was to tackle how our institutions, or how certain institutions allow or look the other way when these problems, when this targeted abuse happens within their walls.
Wow. So, I mean, that's a pretty intense experience to have to. So how many years was that you were the target of this bullying?
It was 2 years, two
Yeah.
years. And I'm fortunate enough that my parents were ones that were active in my life, and they knew something was wrong. And I mean, I was closed up. I was not admitting anything. But the moment that I finally, the thought that I could not run away from was, if life is this bad at 11 years old, how is it ever going to get any better? Like I'm thinking about this as an 11-year-old kid, and when that thought just kind of consumed me, when it started consuming me, that's when I finally opened up to my parents, and they got me to what was kind of known as a last chance charter school. It was a charter school that was about 30 minutes away. And it was, it was welcome. Every student was welcome at this charter school. But it definitely had a lot of students who were just sort of drifters like me. We were all just sort of trying to find our own place. And I would say my middle school experience, it was, there were definitely, it wasn't easy, but it was a place to heal. It was a place to kind of heal and reflect. And I would say, it's amazing, but those 2 years have come to shape so much of what I do today. And it's also like, even last night, I still constantly have dreams about that football, that recess playground where a lot of these things happened. And I also think about one talking point that always really bothered me on a fundamental level, and I still hear it. Like, I still hear it all the time, especially now that I'm a middle school teacher. I teach sixth graders now, and it's that bullying. It's this idea that bullying itself is inevitable, and it's something that people just need to get used to. And unfortunately, there are too many teenagers today who do not see a way out, and because of that, their lives end in incredible tragedy. And why I wanted to enter the classroom was, I wanted my classroom to be a safe place, and for students to know that life can be really hard for them now, but it can get better. Because too often I find that students, they don't have access to that voice. And I think that as hard as it was for me, I to have a teacher who humiliated me like that, if it wasn't for the incredible teachers that I had, I too, I wouldn't be in the place that I am today. And so I try to be that role. And it's the thing that thinking about the length and how long it was to go through that. While it was 2 years, it was something that has come to define my life, but how it shaped my life has been this way where I've worked to find control over that, where I've worked to find closure over those things. And that's something that I try to do for my students today. This year I've been remote teaching, which has been so different in so many different ways, but I always try to have my room open at lunch, and just a gesture like that. It's by the end of last year, I think I had 24 students just in my room with Minecraft, Pokemon tournaments in that room. And it's amazing how just a different environment like that, how it allows an openness from students that I could never get to open up in my social studies classroom. And that's part of the drive I have today as a teacher, and also what influenced me to write this book.
Well, I was going to talk about that. So this occurred to you when you're 11 to 12 to 13, or up to?
Yeah. So I would say the brunt of those experiences happened when I was 11, and my dad was the one who was challenging me to write something from it, or to create something from it. And my mom was someone who was a very passionate writer throughout her entire life, and that was definitely a hobby that I had early on. And it took me a very long time, I think, to be able to. I was too close to it. I was too close to the epicenter of it for a very long time. But I knew I wanted to create something. I was trying to create the book that I needed when I was 11 and 12 years old. That was initially the goal. And in high school, I first wrote a fantasy 600 pages. No one should ever read it. Not a good book at all. But it was kind of like that trial run that I needed, and I finally felt when I finally finished it my senior year, I felt like I was finally ready to get started. And so that was when I was 18 when I started, and then it took all the way until right before my 28th birthday to get this book published. And I think something that I think really helped me finally get the motivation I needed to publish this book was actually entering the classroom, because I had all this doubt after graduating about, I didn't know if I was this issue. The issue of bullying is something that has impacted so many people, and it's something that continues to impact students today. And I didn't know. It almost felt like I didn't know if I was the person to write a novel like this. I didn't know, and I didn't know if it would connect with students. And honestly, it was having real conversations with my students, my high school students that I had, the middle schools that I taught at. I would bring this book up, and the thing that I heard the most from students was that, no, this is a book that needs to be written, and it's a book that has to be real. Something that I struggle with. I teach sixth graders. This book, it doesn't cut corners. There are bad words in this book. There are some really dark moments in this book. But honestly, I didn't censor those after talking to my students. And the comment that I got from a sixth grader last year, this one really stuck with me, is like, Mr. Honeycutt, whatever's in this book, we're gonna hear twice as worse the moment we go out in the hallway. And I mean, honestly, it was like hearing something like that. And it was funny, after talking to that student, I got a map, and I was like, okay, what are the places in this school that teachers don't know about? Like, where do bullying events happen? And I got 2 places in the hallway, like just 2 X's. And it was amazing. Like, just me standing there as an adult, like going in there during the passing periods, the amount of students who would clear out right away. And I checked in with a student a month later, and he was like, you have no idea how much just you standing there, like how much of a difference that's made. And it's been cool because our school has a watchdogs program, and that's allowed me to work with some of our community volunteers to try to find good places in our school. That was something that I felt really lucky. I teach at Woodland Park Middle School in Colorado, and I felt really lucky that those resources were there, and and I'm able to have those conversations with adults in the building, because I'll be honest, I've worked in 5 schools so far, and that's not always the case in schools. And sometimes schools just don't have the space for conversations like that. So I feel very fortunate to be in a school that's always listening and always wants to offer helping hands like that to our students.
And that's great that sort of you're a part of that. So I was going to ask, when it came to writing this book, okay, so you made a decision to write this book. Gosh, 1 second, let me just switch off that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry about that. So when it came to writing this book, how did you even get started? How do you get started writing Bleak?
I didn't know exactly what I wanted to create for a long time until I watched The Breakfast Club in 8th grade. And it's really interesting. I from the very beginning, I had very mixed feelings about the movie, and overall, I mean, it was really impactful for me. I don't want to criticize John Hughes or any of the actors, because it was very raw. Like the movie itself, like it had very real emotions and very real situations in the movie, and it was so intimate. Like the entire movie itself almost feels like a bottle episode of a TV show. Like it's set in one setting, and because of that, it allows the characters to really be introspective in a huge way when you're not worrying about the setting of a place, when the setting itself is static. And the thing, though, that always stuck with me, though, was that the Monday after, I just felt there was no way everyone did not revert to exactly where they were before. And I mean, it comes from personal experience. Like it really did. I thought back to the times where there were, some of the kids who who bullied me, constantly. We would sometimes play in summer sports together, and it would just be us. Everyone else would be from like another town, and none of that bullying transferred over. It was like we had a completely separate relationship. But the moment we went back to school, all of it continued. And there was something about that sort of that institutional blanket that I continue to come back to. And so I knew I wanted, after the Breakfast Club, I knew I wanted to write something. I just didn't quite know exactly what I wanted to write. The movie, I watched a movie called in eighth grade, and I only watched it one time. And I didn't realize how much of an influence it had until someone pointed it out to me. But I watched the movie Bang Bang You're Dead, which was heavily inspired, from Columbine and from the zero tolerance policies that were sweeping across the United States. And I also read The Chocolate War by Robert Cormier and The World According to Garp. And those books, what suddenly occurred to me is that I wanted a book that transitioned from third person to first person. So third person, where you kind of have this overarching view of how the world sees the main character being Tommy. So what is the world's impression of Tommy? And then that transitions to the first person, where you actually see Tommy the person, unfiltered. And that transition was really, really important to me, because I feel like according to I'm trying to remember what organization did this. So the U.S. federal government started tracking bullying in 2005, bullying statistics, and 70% of students have reported seeing bullying in the hallways. 70% of students. But the majority of the students who see bullying indicate that they don't know what to do about it. They see it, they have no idea what the recourse is. And I think in the same survey, 57% said they did not report it to anyone. No one reported it whatsoever. And so, with those in the same survey, the students who said that they were bullied said that the people who bullied them had control over how they were perceived by the rest of the student body. And that last statistic was really impactful for me, because it made me realize how often students might see a kid getting bullied, and their perception of that student getting bullied could be shaped by people telling them, well, this kid, he has it coming. Like, it's terrible. But the amount of times I have heard that, especially as a teacher now, like, I continue to hear that line, that this person has it coming. This person asks for it. Like, how damaging is that? And so why that third person was so important is I wanted to show that Tommy is looked at as a monster. In fact, it's like believed that Tommy is this complete monster. But transitioning it to that first person view is something that gives the reader the opportunity to see who Tommy really is. Because I feel like too often in life, we don't get that opportunity to have that first person glimpse into someone's life. And quite unfortunately, I think a lot of us assume the worst when we hear things like, well, this person, they really are asking for it, and it's terrible. But that's a line I heard all throughout elementary, all throughout middle school. I got told that to me in middle school. And it's something that it was something that was pretty stark to me when I was first volunteering, when I was at my university. When I first started spending time in schools, one place that I would hang out was the teacher's lounge. And the fact that that was a line I continued to hear in teachers' lounges was something that really reinforced why I wanted to be a teacher. But it also it reinforced that I wanted to have that mix of third and first person perspective. And so I started by writing Tommy's journals to kind of get an understanding of who Tommy was. And then after writing Tommy's journals, I flipped the perspective and tried to actually write the antagonist as the hero. What would this look like if this were, one of the secondary antagonists in the book, Adam Augustine. I think my hope was that if there was another writer who was assigned to write Adam could easily be the hero here. And so that was kind of how I first started writing the book. And it took me a while. I really struggled with brevity, and I think that's obvious with this interview. I go on and on and on. And so the first draft was well over 500 pages, and then over the course of the last few years, I got it to just under 300 pages. So yeah.
Well, I find that really interesting. You know, the idea of the perspectives, I think, is really unique. I started off like a lot of people writing in third person, and then I moved to first person because that's the convention of my genre, and I really enjoy it because, you know, you have to have that rigid perspective because you could only write what that person can see. But I love the way you describe like having Tommy's viewpoint and then the third person, and also the whole idea of the antagonist being the hero, because I guess in their own head they are. I think that's the crazy thing. It's like even Adolf Hitler probably thought he was a good person at the end of it, and it's kind of scary when you look into that, and that's a really amazing way to kind of get that viewpoint. There aren't that many books to me that sort of jump out that have ever approached the subject in the way you do. I remember Jodi Picoult has written some pretty good stuff. I love the way you don't shy about using the bad language and the way kids talk to each other, because you're right. I mean, I listen to my two eldest boys and the language that comes out of them. But I just watched the new version of It, and that's got, you know, the kids who are like 11 and 12, and they swear like sailors because that's what kids do. And so you're right. I think that the authenticity is so important. In terms of the arc of the story, like, did you plan that out beforehand? Did you know what was going to happen? Is there anything that kind of changed about it as you went through? Because telling a story, you know, you have to have kind of that arc and the sacrifice and the end and bring it all together. So tell me about the process of like crafting it as a story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of my primary goals when writing this, I was also really inspired by Laurie Halse Anderson's Speak when reading this book, and also there was one more major influence. I think the thing that when I was exploring this book with Tommy is one of the main goals was that I didn't want any saviors for Tommy. And one of the primary characters is a art teacher named Mr. Austin, who was actually heavily inspired by my own dad and the impact that my dad has had as a teacher on so many students. But what was really important to me, though, was what I was really struggling with was that when I was first drafting it, I mean, it was feeling, and I love Good Will Hunting, but it was just really like it almost that originally one of the primary scenes almost felt like just a complete ripoff of Robin Williams saying it is not your fault. And I couldn't do that. Like the goal was wherever Tommy ended up, it had to be a decision that Tommy made, and it had to be something, any revelations that were made, it couldn't have been guided from a savior in the story, from one of Tommy's friends, from an adult, from a mentor in Tommy's life. It had to be something that Tommy concluded, or something that a realization that Tommy made. And so I actually remember the moment that the plot crystallized for me. And it was where, this climactic moment where, Tommy, one of the main themes of the book is trying to find a way out of here. What can we do to find a way out of here? And I try to be very loose with the term here. What does here mean? Is here Kind Pines, the single wide trailer that Tommy grew up in without skirting? Is that what Tommy means by here? Is here the mental place that Tommy is in, where Tommy is going through that perpetual anguish at school, where he is enduring targeted abuse on a daily basis? What does here mean? And so when Tommy finally comes to that conclusion that Tommy thinks he has found a way out of here, what sparks that? And it goes to this, to what's on the cover, a dandelion. And I remember the moment where that kind of final moment snaps together. I was actually listening. I was in a Sears with my friends, and I was like in the waiting room as my friend was trying on debate clothes. We were debate partners. We were in high school, and I was listening to a song by the band Opeth called Bleak, and that song has this huge transition right in the middle. And the moment that transition happened, that's when I finally everything came together, and I realized the dandelion was what could inspire Tommy to finally make that decision, that decision where he feels he has found a way out of here. And so once I had that, when I write, I have to know the beginning and end. When I write, I always struggle with the middle. Always struggle with the middle because it can just go on and on and on. But I won't write any project unless I know the beginning and how it ends. And once that came together, I knew I knew how I wanted to end it. It did take me a while to get the chess pieces moved from point A to point B, but once that happened, that was I think 2 months before I started writing. Before I actually started writing the book, at that point I was like, all right, I got to finish this fantasy I've been working on for forever, and then I'm ready to start writing.
Joe, that's so interesting. That's a really good decision to. I always say the thing that separates a successful writer from an unsuccessful writer is the ability to finish a project. So I love the fact that you finished that fantasy before moving into this one. So tell me about the writing process. So like, how do you write? Did you have a specific time that you carved out? Do you have a space to write? There's a pretty unique story here, I know. So I'm kind of like leading into that. So tell me about the writing process.
Yeah, it definitely took me a while to get a organized process. I'm naturally very disorganized, and so finding an organized writing process took me a very long time. And I, being in the School of Ed, you know, I was in a creative writing major for about a year. And I sort of realized while being a creative writing major was that I was getting so overwhelmed with different writing projects. I think at one time I had 6 writing projects happening at one time, that I was just really losing touch with Bleak. And I finally had an amazing professor, Dr. Ann Martinez. I took this dream class for me, which was she was talking about fantasy, and I was comparing how the hero has transitioned from Sir Gawain to Tyrion Lannister through our site. Like, this is like the dream class for me, and yet every single project I did was coming in late. I was turning it in late. I had a different apology every time, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, but X happened, that kind of thing. And finally, she sent me an email that, what felt pretty eviscerating at the time, but it was very fair. And she was like, Ben, you need to find what your passion is and figure out why you're here. Like, why is it? Like, what are you wanting to get out of your college experience? Because she's like, I feel like I've asked you this question 3 times this semester and I've gotten a different answer every time. And talking with her is what inspired me to get back into the School of Education. And I remember when I got back in the School of Education, this huge decision loomed over me, which is, do I need to give up writing Bleak? Do I need to, is this a project that is just going to be unfinished? And am I okay with that? And at the time, I was actually working a cashier job at my college dining hall. And it was a very strict policy that you could not bring in paper. You could not bring in journals. You could not bring in composition books, anything. You could not do homework. And it was very specific because it was, you're working at a college dining hall. Well, I saw one of my close friends. She was drawing on a receipt one day before I took her shift. And I was like, that's really interesting. And because all the students use their student IDs to scan, we actually rarely used receipts. And so I'm like, I wonder if I just printed out receipts, started writing, what would happen. And I was like the only cashier that was like hard-nosed enough. I would not let college students steal our plates. Like, that was like our biggest issue. We lost like $2,000 the first semester because everyone was just walking out with the plates. And so my one thing is like, I just wouldn't let people take plates. And so I'm writing, and my student manager and I had a kind of a hard-nosed boss. One time my hard-nosed boss walks out and like catches me in the act. Like, I am absolutely writing. I'm using like this Pilot G2 pen. So it's like tiny font. And you know, he looked at me, and the student manager comes out and is advocating for me right away. She's like, "Hey, he's the only one who is stopping people from stealing stuff." And he's like, "Hey, as long as you're doing your job." And that's all he said. And so after that, like I looked at that as just like, this is the ultimate endorsement. I ended up writing 20 chapters on the backs of receipts, and I actually have them. I can go grab them to show you what that looks
I
like.
saw actually a picture of you
ended
with them laid out on the table.
Yeah, yeah. It was tremendous though for my writing process, and it's ended up shaping my writing process because it was the best first draft I could ever ask for. Like, and something that I've had to learn how to embrace is the crappy first draft.
Yeah.
I have to. If I don't, I just got to get it out of my system, and that's helped me tremendously as a writer, is just writing it out and then editing afterwards. And that was perfect because I would have 4-hour shifts, and I was like, all right, I got to get as much written as I can in 4 hours, and I can't do homework anyway. Like, there's nothing else I could be doing, and I worked the 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and for college students, that 6 to 9 a.m. slot like may as well be a ghost town. So it was like this perfect, or 6 to 10 a.m. rather. I mean, it was just this perfect time. And so but it was perfect, my process, and I would say that's my process now. Is I use an app called Scrivener for my writing because of just how easy it is to organize my thoughts. But I usually start especially if I'm stuck on a scene or a concept, is I pull out. I have a tiny journal that I got in Nepal. I pull that out and I just write out that first draft by hand, type it in, and correct as I type in. And that's been tremendous. And I've kind of tested this writing process a little bit. I've been really encouraged by the response to Bleak so far, and have written the first part of a potential Bleak sequel just that way, with that process where I just kind of get that first draft done, type it up, and then make corrections as I'm typing it up. And it's been, I think that's kind of where that process has been. I have to absolutely thank the creators of Scrivener. That application has been huge, and being able to just it naturally separates the chapters and allows you to also create character and setting sheets too, which really helps me as someone who's naturally just very disorganized have something that at least has the appearance of organization, and helps me go back to especially as I'm writing scenes, to make sure I'm not repeating myself, or to make sure that what did happen previously, instead of scrolling through just endless amounts of pages to try to find a previous conversation, I can just isolate it by chapters. And that's been huge for my writing process.
Oh, I hear you there. I have this series of romance novels, and I got to the 9th one in the series, and I suddenly remembered that in the first book I'd given this guy a brother, and then by the time I got to book 9, I was like, wow, for the previous 8 books he's been an only child, but in that first book he's got a brother. So having those character sheets and things is really, really important. So, I mean, that's... Okay, so you wrote your first draft on the receipts, and then you typed it out laboriously and corrected it then, and that was sort of slowly how it came together. How much more editing did you do after that? I mean, how long did it take you to finish the book?
Yep, so finished the first draft in 2015. It's now 2020. And I think a lot of it is I just didn't know a lot of writers. And that was part of that decision that I had made, to leave that creative writing track and go into the School of Ed. And it was tough because I was sending it to publishers. I think I might have sent Bleak to around 20 publishers, and I just wasn't getting the feedback. It was difficult because the feedback was like, there are some great ideas here. Like there is some realness here. Like I kept getting compliments along that line. This is a realness. It's about such an important issue. It's just not quite there. And I kept getting that phrase, it's not quite there. And it was tough for me. And I had a lot of amazing, I was very fortunate because I did have a few authors who I was lucky enough who dedicated their time to really looking at Bleak and really and really giving me some good feedback. And that helped me get the draft from 116,000 words to about 80,000 words where it is now. And it helped it be more concise, but it still wasn't quite there. And honestly, my friend, that's when you saw the 80,000 word draft. Like I was kind of at a point where I just felt like I was at a stalemate. The advice that I had got was to go to conferences. And some of these conferences were about $500 to attend. It was basically like speed dating with editors, where you would just give the book to different editors. At least that's how it was to me, and it's so tough for me. Like my wife and I are both teachers. Like $500 is like a massive investment for us, and so and we had our son Alex on the way, and so we had to basically choose: do we redesign the baby room, or do I go to this writers conference? And it was an obvious choice. Like we're gonna redesign the baby room. But that's when I met you, and your advice. The advice that you gave was the one thing that I had done, and this came because I was so inspired by like Breaking Bad, The Wire, Better Call Saul. Was I almost had the scenes I almost had laid out like an episode of TV. Like it would go from one perspective to another perspective to another perspective, because I was imagining it almost like a TV show. And you pointed out that it would probably, the organization would be better suited if it was one point of view per chapter, and also narrow my point of views. I think I counted, I had, when I first did this, I had, I think maybe up to 14 total points of view. And I remember when you first gave me that advice, like part of it, like you said, hey, Ben, I understand if you're fried at this point. I get it. It sounds like you've been working on this for a long time. And I remember when you first gave that advice, it was like the ultimate, like, it was like heartbreaking because I knew the task it was going to be. But at the same time, it was also very motivating because, I held you in such high esteem, and
You're a fool.
And yeah, but you telling me that, hey, no, you owe it to yourself to finish this, like that was huge. And so I got it narrowed down to about 5 points of view, 1 point of view per chapter, and really worked to rewrite that. I was fortunate enough, my roommate Pearl is an English teacher, and she is an incredibly talented editor, and edited my book. And I also got a sensitivity reader for the book too that I just met over Twitter, who ended up doing way more than I asked. He was almost a second editor and gave me such wonderful advice, and then got connected to a book reviewer called a book reviewer. Her Insta is called Kelly Hunsaker Reads, and she said she would read my book, and her encouragement, like everyone's kind of encouragement throughout this whole time, was like, this has got to be published. And I remember like leading up, then you had asked, what track I wanted to be. Do I want to go back to the publisher route? And my son, at this point, my son's gonna crash the party in about a month, and I remember coming to you and saying like, all right, let's get this published. I was like, I think it's ready. And no, I feel incredibly thankful because, over just the last year, I went from wondering about whether or not this book was ever going to get published to this book, holding this book in my hands in less than a year. And it's been just such an incredible experience that I'm so thankful for.
It's fun. I will never forget the first time like I got one of my books physically in my hands, and it's such an incredible experience. I was going to say though, for somebody self-publishing for the first time, like you've already got some really, really strong organic reviews coming in. I mean, what's the reaction been to it? What have you experienced now you actually have your book in print?
I'll be honest, I did not expect the reaction that I got. It's tough because like I've been working on this for so long, and so I didn't know if this was going to feel antiquated to people, like because things move in really quick cycles in school. There have been, it's pretty wild to think about, but I've been since this experience happened to me, I was in 5th and 6th grade, and now I teach 5th and 6th graders. So is anything I'm writing still going to feel relevant? And the thing that was pretty amazing was that I had published before I announced publication of the book, it was on Amazon for a couple of days, and a couple people found it. And the thing that was amazing to me was that I got an email from someone who read the book, who stayed up all night reading the book. And he's a person, he's close with my parents, and he and I know each other, but like we know each other through my parents, and he's not someone I don't know if someone had asked me, what do you think he would think of this book? I don't think I would have known the answer. I don't think I would have been able to know what his impression of the book would be. But that was huge. And I remember before I rewrote the book, from your advice, before I rewrote the book, something that kept happening was like even my best friends would get caught halfway through in the book. They would read it halfway, and they talked about how they were getting lost with some of the perspectives. And I didn't know why that was happening, but the constant back and forth from the points of view was a big problem. And but I didn't. Part of me wondered though if that would happen again, like when it got published, if people would get caught halfway through, that kind of thing. I didn't know if they'd be able to finish it, but that kept happening. People who I knew in high school, like they were seniors and I was freshman, like we knew each other, but like we weren't super close. I kept getting messages talking about how that they experienced incredible bullying in high school, and about how this book spoke to them, about how they felt like, and how they had to stay up through the night to finish, to find out what happened to Tommy, to find out how this ends for Tommy. And the thing that's really stood out, and this is what's meant the world to me, because this was my main goal writing the book, is how genuine and authentic and real. Those are the three terms that I keep hearing, and that was the goal right away. And something that was pretty amazing was that I did wonder, how is Gen Z going to take this book? Like, how is, I teach Gen Z, and I, it's I know some people really struggle with those terms, separating generations, but there are differences. It's interesting. Like there are, and I've been so amazed. It gives me hope for the future, teaching this generation. But I did wonder, I'm like, what are they going to think of this book? And one of my students ordered this book from Amazon while I was actually on paternity leave. She sent me an email saying that she found my book and ordered it. And I wondered, I'm like, all right, what is she going to think? And what was amazing was, so far the majority of reviews have come from people who are my age or older. And she also had that same reaction, and talked about how refreshing it was that a teacher could be this real. And so that's what I've heard so far. And I don't know. It's my hope has always been like, if this book could help one student who is in the position that I was once in, that's that has always been my main goal, is that it can be the light, a light in someone's world, especially for someone who really needs a light. And so that's what my hope is. Like the more people who read it, especially the teachers who are reading it, who say they want to introduce it in their classrooms, my hope is that it can connect with someone who is really looking for something and really needs something like this in their lives.
Joe, that's so interesting. I've heard a really good piece of advice. It's just when you write a book, you write it for like one person, and you hit that. So it sounds like that's exactly what you've done in thinking about it. So we are nearly coming up to the top of the hour, because I've been loved talking to you about this. But I was going to say, how can people find your book? Where is it? What are they going to? Because you've got it in paperback. It's available on a Kindle book. You're doing an audiobook version as well?
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon right now.
Yeah.
And it's $3.99 for the Kindle version, and $9.99 for the paperback. And actually, my mom is currently in the process of reading. So where I found my love for reading and writing is my mom was a brilliant actress, and won multiple scholarships, and just has, she is someone who she has a way when reading book. In fact, this book that I'm reading, Holes, right now.
Oh, that's a great book. That's a fantastic book.
And I remember the first time she read that book out loud to me, and it's like she just has a read on characters and can bring every character to life. And so, I kind of threw out there, I'm like, if you wanted to read this book, that kind of thing. And the next thing I know, my dad's setting her up with a mic, setting her up with everything. And so she's in the process. We're hoping that by the end of 2020, we can get an audiobook released, because, especially in the early part of my life, that was how I most connected with books, is when I could hear the characters. And so I would love, my hope is that can be available on Audible by the end of the year as well.
That's fantastic. And so you said you've already thinking about a sequel. What are you working on next? What's going on? What are we going to see next in Ben Honeycutt's Amazon catalog?
So the book title that I have in mind is called Arriving. And so I think Bleak the whole one of the fundamental ideas of Bleak is what is finding your purpose, like what is ultimately going to be your purpose in life. And arriving itself is similar how Bleak is kind of thematically about that constant search for purpose in life. Arriving is about death, and it's about when that moment happens, this moment that is inevitable for all of us, um, at the end of our lives. Is Are we ready for that moment? It's inspired actually, from another song called "Arriving Somewhere but Not Here," "Arriving Somewhere but Not Here" by Porcupine Tree. And what I always got from that song was that in that moment we can never predict when that moment is going to happen. And it's something I wanted to write about. My mom was in a head-on collision actually in college, just as a can of soup that was in her car that got dented up.
Oh, wow.
The other cans of soup exploded. And she survived, only had broken ribs. But if that vehicle that hit her, I mean, it was 70 miles an hour both ways, had been 6 inches further to the left, my mom would not have made it. And that moment really shocked me back into the world. I was kind of floating there for a while. And I remember in that moment, after talking to my mom, and I remember I was sitting outside after talking to my mom after coming home. I went home on the Amtrak. And I remember I just sort of realized that moment could happen at any time for me, that I couldn't take this time for granted anymore. And it, the 3 goals that came to my mind was that I'm going to go to Nepal as part of my nonprofit. I'm going to graduate and be a teacher, and I'm going to publish Bleak. Those were the 3 goals that I had. And that constant thought I had about death, it was the first time, I struggled with depression a lot. In elementary and middle school. And it was the first time that I thought about death in a non-morbid context. It wasn't like this, it wasn't this cloud that hung over me in my life. It was almost this liberating feeling, this thought that whenever this moment happens, I'm going to be proud of the life that I lived. And so that's kind of now, that's sort of the thought of where arriving is. And it's different. I want to, in order to write a sequel, I have always felt like the best sequels have a different theme than does their identity stand on its own, or is it a rehash of the same ideas? And so Bleak kind of spans over August to March. It's that kind of timeline of Bleak. Arriving takes place over 14 hours. And it's going to be set almost a year after where Bleak ended. And so, and it checks in a lot of the characters that are in Bleak, and right before a lot of them are considering this massive leap from high school. Where is life taking them next? And so, it was funny. I didn't know. I didn't really have any ideas for a sequel for a very long time. And then one day, just coming out of the shower, it just kind of clicked. And so I didn't know if I was going to write it or not, but the response and feedback I've gotten from Bleak has been really encouraging. And how quickly now that I'm writing, it's like the muse is with me right now. And so I'm trying to capture that and ride with that right now and just kind of see where it takes me.
Oh, well, I cannot wait to see it. And hopefully this is not going to be the last time we chat, because I've got tons more questions to ask you. But Ben, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me. And I will make sure to have a link down to Bleak down below. And we will catch up very soon.
Thank you so much, Roland. I appreciate your time.